my daughter. Because in everything that I did, I wanted to make sure the world that I left was more advantageous for her, be encouraging young women to look into tech. I'm on the state board of Women in Technology Wisconsin, and I'll support women in technology until I can't get out of the chair anymore. So we got a few more decades of Maribeth influencing that group of people for sure.
Welcome to the Change Agent Podcast. My name is Nathan Lesnowski, and I'm your host. We, on this podcast, talk with amazing change agents across the tech industry who are thinking about their business in different ways, that are thinking about bringing the mission of their business to the market through the veins of technology, that think about how they can transform the way that their internal operations function, the way they engage their people, the way they do so in an empathetic and engaging way. We just had fantastic guests on this program. We've had people that have talked about healthcare transformation, about manufacturing transformation. We've had people talk about agile and cloud and development. And today's guest is no different. It is a fantastic guest. We're today talking with Maribeth Achterberg. Maribeth is the Vice President of Solution Delivery at Molson Coors. She is a fantastic technologist that even has a very interesting path as to how she got into IT. And I'm really happy to have her on the show today. Welcome, Maribeth.
Well, thank you, Nate. And I'm very happy to join you today on the Change Agent Podcast. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. So let's kick it off. Tell me a little bit about how you got into tech and a little bit about your role.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually didn't start my career in tech. I started my career working for Wisconsin Public Service, a utility based out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, years ago. They don't even really exist as their own entity any longer. They're part of Wisconsin Electric Corporation. But back then, they were their own utility. And I started in operations and did some work in marketing and market research. And then finally was part of a large change project and it wrapped around doing business differently because at the time the utility industry was going through a lot of transformation based on deregulation. And so they had to think about, oh my gosh, all we know are meters. There are actually people making decisions about those meters on the other side. So now we have to figure out who our customers are and figure out billing systems and business intelligence to help us make better decisions and then CRM. And it was just a really interesting and amazing time to be part of that industry. So because I was operations marketing, we were pulled together into a large project that started to look at how information technology could solve some problems in a way that could help them meet market demands that they hadn't had to think about before. So that was my entry into IT and information technology, and I really enjoyed it. I excelled at it. Had an opportunity to then move to an organization that was doing data warehouse strategy and did some consulting with them. And finally hung my own shingle and had my own business doing IT strategy and IT work for about 8 years. And had opportunity then to come back to Wisconsin because of family requirements, and did some enterprise architecture work at Schneider National, which is a fantastic local company that is actually very much a technology organization that happens to deliver and transport and do logistics. And held some roles that, frankly, I was doing as a consultant, but really didn't understand the fact that that's what I was doing, enterprise architecture. And then just had opportunities to fill our IT roles at Johnson Controls and now at Molson Coors. So really feel fortunate when I look back on my career that I was kind of tracked into IT. But to be honest with you, I think everybody now, it's ubiquitous. It's not like you can be a non-tech person. It touches you in every aspect of every role. And in some cases with IA and machine learning, in robotics, it might actually be displacing some people's roles. And so we have to think about that, right? What is the next level up for some people that may, because of the advances in technology, are needing to recast themselves and think about their roles differently.
I like what you said there about how every role essentially involves technology now. Like it's a verb rather than a noun in a sense. It's sort of part of the fusion of any role that we do, and we combine that with our other skills that we've learned over the years.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, when I started working in corporate America, that wasn't necessarily the case. And so people thought about tech as a thing that other people did. I'm doing my process, but the tech is something somebody else does. That I don't think anybody even thinks that way any longer. And the generations coming up, actually, I think they're born with a device in their hands. So, yeah, it's a whole different mindset that people, of my vintage, and particularly, people coming up into management for IT need to think about. It's just not optional. It is integrated.
Yeah, I feel like there's this age where tech was like this thing in the corner that was just scary enough that I kept throwing money at it. And now it's like that door's gone. It's part of everyone's job. It's part of how we even think about the business in general. I love what you talked about with Schneider. Like, truly, like logistics companies are truly software companies that happen to deliver product via a truck or any other kind of logistical platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about that, what drives it is what drives any business that's public or private, probably for that matter, is profit.
Mm-hmm.
And when your profits are that slim, you really have to think about solving that problem in the most expedient and cost-effective manner. And that's tech. So now when you think about in manufacturing, which tends to be a lagging industry from tech adoption, they're facing the same challenges. And I think the pandemic really accelerated that with the supply chain issues. So how can I leverage tech to produce more and get it out the door faster and delivered in a real high quality way? And you think about the supply chain and into the manufacturing space. Tech is solving a lot of problems that are now predictive and preventative rather than, oh my gosh, my line's down because some motor failed and it's going to cost me $1 million waiting for this part to show up. Where with IA, I can say, look, I know that this part's going to fail. Maybe I can 3D print it quickly and get it implemented on third shift and prevent any of that downtime whatsoever. So it's really actually a pretty exciting time to be in technology because we're solving real business problems and the business people are realizing we have something to offer. And we think about business problems rather than I'm just that person in the corner that's coding for you.
Yeah, truly, truly. I love what you're talking about on the supply chain topic as well. Like how, it's very, and cyclical in a sense too, because you'll have manufacturers that have to manage inventory or parts to produce their supply, to run their supply chain at a given point. And maybe 3 years ago, the challenge was, how do I have as little inventory as possible to be able to run this supply chain and save that inventory cost for times that I don't need it? And then the pandemic happened and everybody had as much inventory as they get their hands on. And now it's sort of cycling in the middle, depending upon how, what the backlog of sales is for the particular company. And AI has this just tremendous part to play in helping combine the intuition that we have as humans with the, raw ability for it to be, say, I predict X is going to happen, and you can use that information.
Yeah, years ago, Peter Senge published a book called The Fifth Discipline, and it talked about this process conundrum we have, particularly around supply chain. And it starts with this example called the beer game, which is really, germane to where I'm working right now. And the whole idea about having right levels of inventory and not having that glut and encumbering capital was the whole game, right? How do you make these decisions? Well, if we had artificial intelligence and machine learning, it really does smooth out some of those peaks and valleys. And so it's a perfect way to apply new thinking and technology to solve real world problems, which are looming, right? We just had this prospect of a railroad strike, which really would have interrupted lots of things. Thankfully, it seems like that's been averted. But machine learning and artificial intelligence can help us hop over some of these bumps. And it's really, like I said, it's an exciting time to be a technologist.
Yeah, what you're saying there, I think is totally key because I think historically a lot of people thought about tech as like a below the line thing. Like it's the workstations, it's how I do productivity, it's the server room and stuff. But now it has this really tangible impact on operational savings, just in the direct way of like how much inventory I have or how many parts I have to keep my supply chain going, or should I be replacing this element? Or I'm directly improving revenue via engaging my customers more elegantly, or I'm even building it right into the product itself. So there's so much opportunity that exists in this space as you think about its integration into the mission of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the other things are still important, and we're still looking at how to modernize the platforms that we use and the infrastructure. And it really plays into some of the digital transformation conversation that I've been talking about lately. Um, you know, all of those things are being modernized and thought about differently than the way we did, even 5 years ago. I know there are still companies that have a mainframe, but when you think about where you want to go, it should be off of mainframes and thinking about the cloud so you can have more flexibility and put that capital back in what the business thinks is important. So one of the messages I'm sending all the time is IT folks need to think like business people. How are we adding value to the bottom and top line? We really can't be focused on coding and throwing it over the wall. We have to apply our intelligence in different ways to help our business achieve the value to the stakeholder, the shareholder, and the customer. And so that's what we talk about in my organization.
Truly, truly. How has your background enabled you to be effective in that role today? Coming from a non-traditional approach, well, maybe non-traditional is the wrong word choice because so many people enter IT from all these diverse directions, right? But coming from a background which isn't directly in tech, how has that enabled you to be effective in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I was really fortunate. And as I look back, and it looked like, I'll use an analogy of a fine rug. If you look at that rug from the backside, you see all the threads and it looks all the knots and it looks pretty gnarly. When you turn it over, you've got this beautiful fine rug that's been woven. And I think about my career and it's like, gosh, yeah, all of these experiences have been additive. And so I really credit the work that I did in total quality management years ago at the utility. Again, going back to that utility experience where they allowed us to think about how could you be more efficient, focusing on process improvement and really applying measurements, metrics to make data-driven decisions. And so I carry and have carried that experience forward throughout my entire career. How do you make the process better? This is really people, process, and technology. Technology is usually more expensive, and it should be the last leg of the stool, not the first leg of the stool. But how are you improving the process? And if you're going to pull that technology lever, it has to provide value to the business. It can't be spend that's not going to give a return. And so I credit all of that experience, my background in Lean and Six Sigma, and really understanding when I look at a problem, technology isn't the first thing I lead with. Although now it's so integrated, it's often always part of the answer. But let's look at some of the other things and make data-driven decisions, right? You take measurements, you understand what you're trying to accomplish, and you have quantitative metrics that prove the investment in technology is actually getting you the lift you expected.
Yeah, a huge point on data-driven decisions being used to make decisions that are really more objective in nature, but then combined with our intuition that we may know is coming. When you think about that, the data-driven pipeline, just the ideas around that, time to value and time to insights maybe are big topics here. How have you thought about those in your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can tell you a real tangible example. We're in the middle of implementing Agile as a methodology for developing solutions for the business, which is really important in a CPG business because we're very much tied to consumer taste, which tends to change. And so you have to be more nimble and agile in the solutions you're delivering in making sure that our company can introduce new products in a really timely fashion. And so the whole idea of cycle time, how quickly are we actually delivering the technology enablement that they need to introduce new products? We have a real focus on and being measured by how are we reducing time to market, this cycle time reduction, and then how are we improving the quality of what we're delivering so that there's no impeding the putting into the solutions put into production. And we measure that. Those are two things I watch on a monthly basis. So, and when we do program increment planning, PI planning for our agile release trains, we talk about the metrics. How well did you do? How are we going to improve? They have a focus on cycle time reduction. So this whole time to value, even though years ago when we were looking at data warehouse strategies and making sure that people, the organizations we worked with were investing dollars so that they weren't in terms just paving the cow path, but actually creating new value. I've been having these kind of conversations for a couple of decades. It's interesting to me that with IT folks, it's still new conversation, but my mission is to help them understand it's important for them to have those conversations and think in that way because they're part of the business. There's no special IT bonus program. The board of directors doesn't dismiss their IT folks when they're thinking about how are we adding value. We are not people who are set aside.
Right.
We have the same, right? We have the same expectations from all the stockholders and stakeholders to deliver value to the business. So we have to think that way. We have to think like business people. So that's part of the things that we're doing at Molson Coors.
You mentioned going down the path of adopting Agile and, in a really practical way, how have you pivoted the business to be able to receive a sort of a more incremental approach to getting that output from tech? The non-waterfall project plan to the I might be getting something that's a little bit more raw, and then I'm going to react to it, and then I'm going to get a little bit more raw, and then I'm going to react to that. What has been the experience of pivoting them to that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and it is an interesting journey because we've taught people in other functions in the companies we work in for years on how to interact with IT and get something from them in this waterfall fashion. And it's like, I'm comfortable with just telling you what I want and going away for 18 months. It's like, that's a long time, right?
Yeah.
No business is stagnant for 18 months while you IT folks go perfect your documents and do some of that work. So it's really just a conversation of one, assuring them that I'm going to give you a minimum viable product, and I'm not going to ignore you for a year or two now. You actually get to come back and talk to me in each of these PI planning events or sooner, right? If you're getting involved at a Scrum team level, you get to talk to these people continuously.
Yeah.
Right. That's a new paradigm shift that has to land with folks in other functions because they're not used to having that conversation. Now, one of the things we're talking about is I think you were asking a lot more of my time. And it's like, no, we're just asking for it in bites more frequently. And so that's one of the conversations that we're having. I'm not really taking up more of your time. It's just more frequent and touch points. So that's one of the conversations we're having. But also when you're thinking about in the commercial space or in the data space, the point is, when you give them something, you give them a dashboard, you give them a report, and they start digesting data, it usually begats requests for more. Always does, right? Because as you get more information, you're looking for more information to continue to put context around a question or a problem you're trying to solve. So this approach actually works a lot better in that sense because there's more back and forth, give and take. Same in the commercial space, right? Because they're working with customers, they're working with distributors, different requests come in, and so the more frequent touch points are welcomed in that space. Where we're having a little different experiences with supply chain folks who aren't used to having a lot of touch points with IT. And so we're starting the journey with laying the foundation of understanding how that's beneficial to them now. But in the data space, in the commercial space, we've had some real good success.
Yeah, there's a saying that if you weren't a little embarrassed by your MVP, you release too late. But I really do love how agile approaches, when done right with the right expectations, they give a much more fluid relationship between the person building and the person receiving, and it becomes more of a partnership than here's my requirements, I'm going to dump them off the back of the truck, see you in 6 months, and hopefully I get something that fits my needs.
Well, as a person in a different function, you should be happy with the fact that I'm interested in talking to you every 2 weeks and improving. So here's the other thing that's interesting too, because as IT folks, we used to want to have control over the entire solution. And because of, lower code environments, there are things now that operations teams can do that are sitting in a function. And it's okay to let go of things like list of valid values or reports or, entering data. I'm okay with that. I don't want to pay somebody who's a solution designer to do that, or an analyst even in IT. I'm okay with handing over some of the things that used to be uniquely in IT, and we might have called shadow IT before, but now it's like, you know what? We're getting to a different place in capability. It's okay to turn over some of those things that are, in my opinion, a little lower value from an IT person's perspective that an operations person can do in the business.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head there with that kind of perspective of shadow IT. Like, shadow IT is going from being like that scary thing to being the enacting of technology being the verb in the business, that like everyone in the business can leverage technology to achieve gains. We did a podcast, one of our previous guests, Chris Wagner from Rockwell, he was talking all about, spreading low code as a capability within their engineering and, their just everyday information worker groups, and the tremendous outpouring of success from that. But then coupling that with, of course, governance that needs to happen around kind of how data is handled and what's a certified data set and what's not, and all that. But just the movement from IT's not a function anymore. It's a expression. It's a skill. You hit on the head there.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, when you think about the evolution of IT now, data literacy, I know some people have called it data fluency. I like literacy first. You have to be literate before you can become fluent. But data literacy becomes a really hot topic. Because we haven't allowed people in different business functions to understand that data is an asset that they own, or that they're a steward or a fiduciary of, we have a little bit of a gap in understanding about how important data is in this new environment, this new business context, and particularly in manufacturing. Now, I think in financial and services, they're light years ahead of us. But in manufacturing, it's like your data is just as important as that piece of machinery sitting over in your manufacturing facility. Mm-hmm. In fact, it might be actually more important. When you think about what cybersecurity events, they're not coming in and stealing beer. They're coming in and stealing data because they know there's value there. And so I think we really have to understand that data is an asset. It needs to be managed like an asset. And people who are in different business functions really are stewards or a fiduciary of that asset and need to manage it.
Totally.
It's not the folks sitting in the technology teams. Well, we can make sure you have all the tools you need to do this in the most expedient fashion, but it's really the different business functions that have to take ownership of that asset.
Absolutely. As a person who's pretty active in the manufacturing space and certainly working for one of our better known companies from a personal standpoint, when you think about like what manufacturers as a community can be doing to enhance technology as part of our mission, as a way we think about tech in the manufacturing space, like what would be things that you say you're passionate about helping manufacturers in the community to be able to do better?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know we've had conversations about this topic, so thank you for introducing it. I think talent is one of the things we need to band together as a community, tech talent, and address. There is a lack of tech talent in some of the spaces that are key and core to the way we run manufacturing, SAP being one of them. SAP moves markets with the way that they change their back-end system, this move from ECC to S4 HANA, the move that they want to make to cloud-enabled with their RISE platform. And we're all still operating in our own little areas and haven't band together to support the fact that we're all going to need this talent, and there's not enough to go around. So that's one thing, right? The core systems that we use to run our businesses all tend to be very similar. What are we doing to band together to make sure that we've got good tech talent and a good tech talent pipeline coming up? Because, there's a lot of people that focused on this that are in the Gen X generation. The baby boomers are almost all gone. What are we doing here? We're pretty soon going to be in a real deficit, and we have to do something quickly because it takes time. So that's the number one issue I see with manufacturers. And Wisconsin and the Northern Illinois, the upper Midwest, let's just put it that way, very heavily dependent on manufacturing from an economic standpoint. So it's an extremely important issue that we need to pay attention to.
I love that.
Other than that, it's just looking at core systems, right? What are the core systems that we use from a manufacturing standpoint? It's a very different conversation than if you look at financial services, insurance, and fintech. And I appreciate, for example, a lot of the organizations in fintech and in financial services pushing the conversation of technology forward, but the technology for manufacturing is different. And a whole slew of architecture and application landscape that these other industries don't have to think about. And so until we band together and have the full force of our economic power behind us, we're not going to get the movement in the market that we need to be successful from that perspective. Industry 4.0, very helpful. But what are we doing as manufacturers to push that conversation forward, I think, is the other piece of that. That's pressing and important.
The commoditization of Industry 4.0 seems to be something that I'm hearing a lot about as well. Like John Dyke from Sesame was on the podcast a while ago, and he was really kind of getting to that point that like there's a lot of spot solutions, and we're all doing things to make our manufacturing environments better. But we don't do well enough at and to a certain extent, people are competitors, but to a big extent, they're not. And just floating all the ships, the efficiency, like the promise of Industry 4.0 really coming true in a very real and tangible sense in the United States is something that it's probably still outstanding for us.
Oh, I agree 100%. It's outstanding. And, we may compete against each other, but not really. I mean, for example, I don't think we'd get in the same consortium with Ambev or Constellation, but we would with other process manufacturers that we're not competing against. There are other manufacturers. I mean, I could name a number of companies in the Milwaukee area that we could band together in a consortium and not compete at all, but be able to move the conversation forward on commoditizing Industry 4.0.
Absolutely.
So I just think there's a lot of opportunity in this space for manufacturers. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, last question. Maribeth, the question that I love to ask you is, you have done so many tremendous things in your career, especially coming from a non-tech background into tech, transforming the organizations you've been at, and especially the stories you've talked about with manufacturing and data. Who's inspired you to have the capabilities to be able to do that well?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a really good question. I have to think about this one. So there are a couple of people that came to mind when I heard this question. One was one of the early. Again, I go back to this utility experience. There was a lady named Diane Ford, who was the chief financial officer there, way ahead of her time, boundless energy. I just think about her a lot as I move through my career, and now that I'm more in an executive role. About the way that she treated people, the high empathy that she showed, and her work ethic was amazing. If I think about somebody on the national stage that really inspires me and still does, because I keep an eye on her, is Condoleezza Rice. There is one person that didn't allow any stereotype to hold her back, that achieved greatly and has some fantastic life lessons to apply when you think about dealing with people, having a modicum of diplomacy in everything that you do. She's very inspiring for me. Even to this day, I like to watch for her. And then the third person would be my daughter, because in everything that I did, I wanted to make sure the world that I left was more advantageous for her. So right now, she's actually doing pretty well. She's a director at Excel Energy. But I always kept her in mind. It's not just about me. It's what am I leaving? What legacy am I leaving for the next generation? So she inspired me to be bold and courageous and do things differently, so that when she's my age, she can look back and say, yeah, my experience was different. It was better. And now I want to do the same thing for the next generation coming up. So those are the three people that I think about.
Amen to that. I love the conversation about the balance of empathy and being a hard worker and being able to understand how to do that well, that they're not like mutually exclusive. That was awesome. And as a father, I totally relate to you wanting to, being inspired by your children in a sense. My oldest is 16, and the experience of her, she's interested in tech, and the experience of her being able to do so in a really assertive way, and it wasn't necessarily the opportunities that she has now are much more than she would have had 15 years ago, and I'm looking forward to that being even more when she grows up and continues, and maybe whatever her kids have the opportunity to do. So it's so inspiring, what we have the opportunity to influence as in our jobs right now.
Yeah, absolutely, man. When make sure that spirit, whatever spirit she has and level of curiosity, that it's encouraged and always supported, because we need her. We're going to need her, and we're going to need her perspective and different viewpoint in the future. And I will always be encouraging young women to look into tech. I'm on the state board of Women in Technology Wisconsin, and I'll support women in technology until I can't get out of the chair anymore. So we got a few more decades of Maribeth influencing that group of people for sure.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. You're just so inspiring, and especially at the end here, talking about inspiring women in tech. It hits a huge tone with me, and also everything you mentioned up to this point on just how we can influence the manufacturing sector and diversity of background. It's awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to the things that we all do together in the future.
Awesome. And we will see you all next time on the Change Agent Podcast.